my name is Jacinta, and a fun fact, I actually was born in Uganda and then I ended up living in Sweden for 3 years, and the first language I spoke was Swedish. So a safe space to me means a place where I can come and bring my full self. I don't have to leave a part of me at the door for fear of being judged or fear of being pushed out because of who I fully am. And a place where I can be vulnerable and make mistakes and just know that I can learn from them and not be completely reprimanded. The industry that I work in now, and I did work in before, is publishing, but predominantly in the advertising space. So my role was a campaign manager. So I was the head of a team of 3. So what a typical day looked like would be me coming in and running reports and seeing where all the different campaigns that me and my team were running activity across, and would look at different problems and just see where our clients could better spend their money or better get more engagement and attraction for whatever advert they were running at the time. So I managed the team also from a personal perspective. So if there was any issues, HR, things like that, just employee management essentially. So that was my role. I guess the difficulties that I faced at the publishing company that I was at was just overt and also covert racism. And for me, it was quite twofold because one, I'm a woman and also I'm black. So the intersectionality there meant that I was oppressed in so many different spaces and in so many different ways. So for example, in a meeting room filled with white men, I would, number one, be the only black person, and then number two, be the only woman, usually. So when I tried to make a point, or if there was something I was trying to say, I'd either be talked over, or I'd just be completely ignored. Or if I did make a valid point, then somebody else would pick it up and then say it, and then all of a sudden, it made sense to everybody in the room. So it was experiencing things like that on a day-to-day basis, where going to meetings made me so anxious and I just didn't want to go because I was like, what's the point of me being here? No one's going to listen to me and I'm just going to have another uncomfortable experience. So why am I even here? So meetings were quite a huge part of my role because I had to report on what my team was doing and how our clients were doing essentially from our kind of department. So so I just didn't want to go to the meetings. I was really anxious and that affected me in ways, even before coming to work, I'd have tears in the morning. Just because I knew what I had to face, going into work that day. Other ways I faced it was just being left out of crucial communication. So if there was going to be developmental changes in my team or the department we worked in, I'd be one of the last to know. So even though I was in a managerial position, I would have the information given to me as if I was just a lower, well, not lower exec, but not in the senior position that I was in. So that just felt like I was being constantly undermined. And when I did speak up about it, they were just like, just wait your turn, like you'll come, basically. So that's how they kind of addressed it with me. Other ways I experienced it was just even from the front desk, the reception staff. So I would see white people walk in and they would be greeted. And for me, it seems quite a small thing, but I noticed it for the 2 years that I was there. They would never greet me. They would never say hello, never say, how are you? I was just invisible, basically. So even from the front desk staff, just was never acknowledged. So that was also something that, just kind of chipped away at me every single day, going in and just not being seen, basically. So that was another thing. And I guess for me, the final straw, which kind of resulted in me handing in my resignation, was when one of the staff on my team, she had a HR grievance, or she had a grievance with somebody on another team. And she asked me what to do about it. And I wasn't too sure. So I went to my manager, asked her, and she said, I think we should go down the HR route because she's basically being bullied by this other person. So I was like, fine, okay. And I asked her for the procedure. I then went to HR and asked them how to deal with this essentially. And they were like, you've done the right thing coming to us. You should raise this as a formal grievance. So I did so. I followed their advice, followed my manager's advice. Ultimately, long story short, we went through the whole process, and at the end, they just said that there should have never been a grievance raised in the way that I raised it. And ultimately, it's just fallen back on me, and they said that this was just a gross misconduct of my management, and I should have tried to step in and mediate with her, with my team, the member of staff on my team and this other person that she had issues with. So for me, to go through that whole process, for it to end up being my fault, I just completely didn't understand. And when I looked at the situation, even on paper, they said this is not a normal circumstance. And when I asked them what normal meant, they couldn't give me an answer. So for me, I almost had to just look at the situation and say, even though I don't want to say it's because I'm a black person, and, you know, yeah, I had to just come to terms with that and say, okay, this is just the racism that I'm facing here, because there was no other reason for it to not be a normal circumstance, especially as I went to do my due diligence and ask my manager and HR for that to fall back on me as misconduct for me. So that was my final straw. You know, I felt like I let my teammate down, and I was like, I don't want to be in this position because I can't help you and I can't do my job freely. I feel like my talent is being oppressed here. So I just had to hand in my resignation, and they basically just told me to leave quietly. I didn't even get an exit interview. There was just no follow-up, no nothing. As soon as I handed it in, that was it really. And I spoke to my manager and the person that hired me, and I said, I face so much racism here, from, you know, this huge thing with HR to microaggressions daily, where people from other teams don't even want to approach me and speak to me. Like, and when they do, they just look so uncomfortable that the fact they have to come to me for information. And I explained that, and they just said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. And I was in tears. I remember that meeting still, looking them in the eye and telling them my experience, crying. And they just said, sorry you feel that way. And that was it. There were just loads of different emotions that I had to experience on a day-to-day basis, and you know, I experience them on a spectrum. So there would be things like anxiety going into meetings, just being around just white men consistently, just so much anxiety, so much just feeling small and belittled. And I am already small, so I know that, but even just in my voice and just knowing that it carried no weight. And how else did I feel? I felt angry. I felt frustrated. There were times I felt depressed because I was like, where am I going? What am I doing here? Everything is just, you know, working against me rather than me, you know. And even if I did want to push against it and, you know, really try and rise up, I'll just be exhausted at the end of the day, you know, trying to do my job, trying to be there for my team, being bubbly, being motivating, and then dealing with all these microaggressions and covert forms of racism, you know, just getting emails here, getting Slack messages there, and then just still having to deal with the day-to-day. So I was just exhausted. And yeah, I just felt really, really sad, to be honest. And I felt defeated. Handing in my resignation was literally the end of it for me. I just was like, this place has defeated me and I have to move on and, you know, go somewhere else, basically. So those were the emotions that I felt at the time. In terms of the support that I did have, definitely from home. I had from my fiance, I had some from my mum, bless her, but she's such a strong, like, African woman. She's like, no, you have to keep fighting, keep going, you can do this, I know you can. So it was just a lot of that from her, bless her. I also had my friends who also had similar situations that they were going through. So we were just kind of there for each other and just trying to, I guess, just be each other's backbone when the other person just, you know, had a horrendous experience that day. So we'd try and encourage each other. And then luckily, actually, I had support from, I'll call her a white ally. She is actually a member of a minority community, and so she's understood it from that perspective, and so she was just completely an advocate for me. And you know, every day she'll check in how I was and, you know, try and give me advice or even try and push things forward from her end, but of course not to the extent where it would jeopardize her role, you know, because they're like, yeah, politics and things like that. So yeah, so inside and outside I definitely did have support. Professionally, no. And that's something maybe I look back on and think maybe I should have sought that out at the time, just to help me through it a little bit. But the advice I would give to myself back then, I would say don't just try and be tough and just go through it on your own and be Superwoman. Continue to tell people about the experience that I'm going through, be open about it and feel the emotions, and yeah, just go through it rather than just trying to fight it and be like, I'm strong. Because I do feel like that took a bit of a toll on my mental health, but also my physical health as well. Just internalizing that stress. So definitely releasing that. I'd also say seek counsel, probably from a professional, because friends are great and family are great, but somebody who actually knows what they're doing and has studied this and has theories and all of those things to basically back up what they're saying. I think that would have definitely helped me, and it probably would have reduced the time that I needed to get out of that really dark place because of what I had experienced. So yeah, that's what the advice I'd give. I'd definitely say it took me a while to get out of the dark place. I definitely was in that space during my resignation period, so that was about 3 months. And then the time after, before it took me to go into my new role, which really uplifted my spirits, was two to 3 months. So I'd say about 6 months really. I was just in a really horrible place, just feeling really negative about myself. I had low self-esteem. I was trying to show up for my friends and like my family and things like that, but it wasn't my full spirit wasn't there. I just felt really diminished and just sad. So yeah.
Hi, my name's Haben and I'm a clinical psychologist. I guess I wanted to start by saying, Jacinta, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. There was so much in what you said that connected to me, not just as a Black woman, but as a professional, as a Black professional in the workplace. You spoke about a number of different things, and I guess some of the things that really stood out to me was what it was like to be one of the few Black people in your workplace, but also having no one in the senior leadership that looked like you. You spoke about having a number of different microaggressions directed at you, and whilst there's nothing micro about microaggressions and we should just call it straight out racism, I guess what is really damaging about those kind of subtle forms of racism are that it can often lead to really invalidating responses. It can make us doubt whether what we experienced and what we heard was really racism. It can make us doubt what we know deep down is racism. And, responses like, just get over it, it's not all about race, can really invalidate our experiences. You spoke about being ignored, being spoken over, feeling less than, and being made to feel like you didn't belong, and how that can leave you feeling really dehumanized and not valued. And I guess it's really then important to think about then not what it was just like being a Black person in the workplace amongst a number of different white colleagues, but what it was like being one of the only females perhaps in the workplace, and the intersectionality of that. So what it's then like to be a Black woman in a very white male dominated workplace, which means you have quite a unique experience. So acts of racial aggression aren't just these one-off acts. Often they're enacted throughout our lifetime and unfortunately across a generation. So that can have severe impacts on our kind of psychological, emotional, physiological well-being. And we see that enacted in things like COVID, for example. So it's important to think about how we can look after ourselves when we're experiencing acts of racism, because they do have an impact. So I guess a little bit of what I wanted to talk about today is how can we look after ourselves. One of the first ways I would say we can look after ourselves when we're thinking about the effects of racism on our kind of psychological well-being is the importance of locating the problem outside of us. Racism isn't something that is unique to the one person or that exists within you. It's not your fault, it's never been your fault, and it remains not your fault. Racism is built on a number of dominant narratives and systems that have been in place for centuries, and it'll take time to dismantle that. And we need to know that being continually exposed to racism via things like the media and messages at work and other social impacts can have an impact, but it's not to do with you, and the problem exists outside of you. So making sure we don't internalize aspects of racism. It's also important to think about the fact that the battle isn't yours to fight alone. We need to connect to other allies, and there can be healing in the collective. There's also a lot of power in the collective, and collective power can drive social change. Thinking about not staying silent about our experiences, speaking out and sharing our experiences, this can also act against those invalidating responses we get to people who say it's not all about race and it's not all about racism. Sharing can also open up alternative ways to cope with the impact of racism within the workplace. And it can lead, like I said before, it can lead to collective healing. It's also important to stay connected to our own community, our ethnic community and our spiritual community. Microaggression can often come with that continued underlying assumption of inferiority, of being less than, of not being good enough. And Jacinta spoke a little bit about this in her story. That can often lead to an impact on our self-esteem. So one way of protecting against that can be by connecting to our race, our ethnicity, to our spirituality, connecting to our food and literature and music. So as an Eritrean woman, I love connecting to my culture and connecting to my community. That gives me a sense of who I am outside of the workplace, outside of society that tells me what I should and shouldn't be. It's also really important to stay connected to those positive stories about yourself. Jacinta, for example, spoke about how scared she felt to sometimes speak out because she was scared of being labelled an angry black woman. And I think, again, that's not unique to her. We saw that in, for example, with Misha B in X Factor being labelled a bully or being told to not be too confident. And we need to think to ourselves, actually, what are the other stories there are about me outside of what the world tries to thrust upon me? What are the other stories that people may tell of you that speaks to you being a good worker, that speaks to you being a brother or a sister or a good, or being good friends, and connecting to those stories? And that can often act as a buffer. I guess linked to that, it's important to then just connect to our strengths and abilities. Like I said, the continued effects of racism is that can sometimes chip away at our self-esteem. So thinking about how we can connect to our strengths and abilities and connecting with those who can witness those and can celebrate that with us. So reminding ourselves of how far we've come and the fact that you deserve to be there just as much as your white counterpart. You have worked just as hard and you are not less than just because of the colour of your skin. So celebrate your achievements and connect to those who will celebrate with you. The next thing I'd move on to is the importance of rest. Often we have to work, and Jacinta again touched on this in her story, having to work twice as hard as your white counterparts. So the next thing I'd say is the importance of rest. We do have to often work twice as hard just to get there, just to get to the same point as our white counterparts. So where you can, rest. So that might mean taking a step back, using your annual leave and doing something that's just for you. Connect to your spirituality, connect to music, take a step back. And sometimes that may also mean taking a step back from social media and the news. More recently, for example, there's been a lot around Black lives. There's been a lot around the George Floyd murders. There's been a lot about COVID racial inequalities. And whilst it's really good to keep informed, sometimes we just need to take a step back and have a bit of a break and do something that just helps save our resources. Collective exhaustion around amongst Black people is a real thing, and sometimes we need to be able to look after ourselves so we can continue the fight. You know, they say it when we're on the aeroplane, put on your own mask before you put on the mask of your child. Sometimes we need to be able to look after ourselves so we can get back and keep the fight going. The last thing I'd say is it's okay to get professional help. Whilst I think there's a lot of stigma around mental health and getting support, there's a lot of stigma around being labelled as depressed or anxious, and I think often even speaking another language can make the stigma even heavier. But I'd say it's okay to get help. Sometimes that can often free us up to be able to engage in the fight and to be able to keep on going. There is a lot of resources out there. For example, there are a lot of Black therapists out there offering support for individuals who want to think about the impacts of racism in their lives. You can also go to the NHS and get support through something called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. But if you go on social media, there are also lots of spaces for you to come together with other people like yourselves and for us to engage with different areas of our community and to get some healing in those spaces. So I'd say look after yourself and just be aware that racism can have an impact on our psychological, emotional, physical well-being, and being aware of that and trying to look after ourselves, and that is a really important thing.